Hi everyone, Daljeet Peterson here from astrolab21.com. This video we're going to talk about the 2023 preview, something that's become a bit of a tradition here on the channel. At the end of every year we reflect on the year that was and look forward to the year to come, which is one of the great gifts that astrology offers us, right? It gives us foresight to look forward and hindsight to look backwards. And hopefully, with having those perspectives, a better sense of where we are in the current moment, the ever-unfolding present. So, yeah, as we put the final closing chapter here on 2022, a rather challenging year in many ways. Certainly that Uranus Saturn square that we had been under the influence for most of 21 and 2022 finally letting up for us as we start and to move into 2023. So a little bit of a relief of the pressure and the tension from that configuration. So something to look forward to, but we have a different set of conditions as we move into 2023. So not as intense in terms of the aspects, particularly that we've dealt with in the last 3 years, right? Since 2020 was a doozy of a year in terms of the astrological weather. We had some heavy hitting transits that hit us, particularly in the spring of 2020 when we had the Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars conjunction in Capricorn, sort of triggered the pandemic phase that we've been living through for the last couple of years. We had the Jupiter-Saturn, the great conjunction, the great mutation that took place on the winter solstice of 2020, a massive, it's the beginning of certainly a 20-year phase that we're initiating with that conjunction, but also a 200-year phase, right? So we're shifting from a focus on Earth and the material resources into air and the ideas and the imagination and the more communications and more of an air focused modality for 200 years. So the Aquarius theme has been initiated for sure by that conjunction. I think one of the things we're going to look at is Pluto now is going to move into Aquarius itself. And we'll actually be at that 0 degree point where we had the great conjunction 2 years ago, almost to the day. So that's pretty fascinating. And I think, as I reflect on the last couple years and look forward to the next year and, in the years to come too, as an astrologer, you're looking at much bigger cycles. And we've got some between now and I'm looking at all the way up to 2028, which will be a very interesting year. But a lot of big cyclical unfoldings taking place. And my sense is that, 50 years from now, we'll look back on this decade as being an incredibly pivotal decade. It will stack up against any of the most impactful decades of the last 150 years. And so I think, we're in the middle of it now. We're sort of just coming out, I think, the first phase of this decade and starting to shift into the middle, the act 2 of the 2020s, if you will. And so it's just fascinating to me to just look and observe at these patterns and these cycles and try to get a sense of, what is trying to be birthed, what is being born, and what are we being called to align with, right? And each of us has our own orientation to these transits, because they're hitting all of us, hitting different points in our charts, stirring up different, parts of ourselves, parts of our lives. Yet there is a sort of collective response that we're all making together. So really quite fascinating. And so, yeah, we'll do the usual. We'll pull up the charts and we'll walk through some of the major transits. Just a handful, really. I'm really going to be looking at mostly the first 6 months even. And it looks like March and May are shaping up to being pretty pivotal periods in 2023. And I think they will probably set the tone for the entire year. So we'll take a sort of an overview look at those just so we can sort of orient ourselves and get prepared for what's coming at us in the year. So share my screen here, and just as a prelude, just to start, a reminder that I do offer or open my appointment book for readings for 2023. Often a great way to start a new year is with a chart reading. If you've never had your chart read, the Blueprint of the Soul reading is sort of my signature reading. Great in-depth chart reading. Of course, if you've already a client of mine and we've done your chart first, we can always schedule follow-up readings so we can really dial in certain things that are coming up for you. I have a big 3 intro reading for people who are just trying to get their feet wet for the first time with their charts. I do a solar return reading for your birthday every year, sort of set the tone for the year to come. New soul reading, if you've just brought a new soul into the world and you're curious about what this little human is aligned for in destiny. It's a kind of very fascinating to look at the chart of a newborn. I do astrology readings for teenagers. I love doing these readings with young adults and sort of help them to find themselves and to set their own personal compass as they move into these such important phases in their lives. Saturn return readings, if you're at that stage in your life, super helpful to get oriented as you set the stage for your adult life. Midlife crisis reading, golden years reading. I've got kind of readings geared for every stage in life. So encourage you to, if you've never had your chart read, it's pretty fascinating. And it's been so much of a pleasure to get to know some of you out there through these readings. That's just one of the things I just love doing. I also have a page here on Ko-Fi, which is a kind of a cool way of, I think, supporting content creators like myself. If you really get value out of what we do and you want to say thank you, you can just buy a cup of coffee for a little $3 or whatever. I think it's a neat metaphor for offering your support, which I always appreciate. And then just a reminder, and for any of you out there who are members of Medium.com, it's where I do most of my writing. It's kind of my blog space. I think it's a great website. I love it. I'm a member as well. It's $5 a month, I think. It's behind a paywall, but it is advertising free, which I think, to me, it's increasingly important to have these online spaces where we can create and support writers and thinkers that isn't as controlled by algorithms that are really trying to generate ads for us to consume. So, and I mention this because I did recently write a couple of articles as I looked at 2023. So the first one I wrote a couple weeks ago was Glimpses of the Global Gear Shift. Quite a nice piece of alliteration there. But that's sort of focusing on what we're going to look at today, which is this ingress of Pluto into the sign of Aquarius. I think it's going to be a major global gear shift, as Pluto transits often are. And then more recently, I wrote an article where I called 2023 the year of the crowning. And I love this metaphor, and that's what I'm going to title this video, Year of the Crowning. And here, I'm not talking about crowning a new king or queen per se, although we did have a coronation in 2022, which I think is pretty kind of interesting as we sort of look to close the chapter on the Capricorn era. Something felt very, it's a very symbolic thing at this point, the British royal crown, but it feels very anachronistic too. It feels like it's just a bygone era. And as we look at what's coming down the road in the very short-term future, the idea of monarchy is a thing of the past. But I want to talk about crowning. The metaphor here is in terms of the metaphor of birth, actually. And so this is a metaphor I've used before. It's an idea I borrowed from, I think, Stan Groff and Richard Tarnas, whose work that they had done, some psychedelic research they did in the 70s. But Stan Groff talks about these stages of birth, and he correlates them to planets in a way where it's like the womb is Neptune, like that watery connection to source. We're still connected to the umbilical cord. We're symbiotic with our mother, our biological mother, and the metaphor of the great mother, the oneness, the connection, right? And then suddenly these contractions start, right? And some of the chemical start to flood into the womb, and it's like this pressure, right? Saturn, right? Compression, pressure, contraction. And we start this descent down the birth canal, right? And it's just like this narrowing into the dark, and it's terrifying, right? And he associates that with Pluto, the descent to the birth canal. And then once we emerge and are born into this new world and take that, that first breath, that's Uranus. That's the new world, the beginning of life. I think it's just such a rich metaphor. And as I reflected on 2023, it felt like we're about to go through, and we have been. I think we've come from the womb. I think Saturn, the pressure, was 2020, 2021, 2022, the descent down the birth canal in a way of this time between worlds. We're literally going through a collective rebirthing in a lot of ways. And so it feels like with Pluto moving into Aquarius, it's like we're crowning, right? It's like when the head first emerges, right? We haven't come completely out of the womb. We're not breathing yet. It's just the crowning, the first indication of a new birth. But I have this sense of there's complications, like it's premature, I wrote in an article, it was like this metaphor of like we're going to have to become our own astrological obstetricians. Like we're going to have to give birth to ourselves in a lot of ways. So this metaphor of the year of the crowning, I think, is interesting. And as I often do when I'm thinking about an article or the thumbnail for a video, I'll look at the art world, because I think artists are always tuning us into the future. They've got their finger on the pulse of something, often way before we and the rest of society tend to catch up. And this is one that caught my eye, Orgasmic Birth by Dan B. Pham, and I'll have a link to it in the description. But there was something very Plutonian about this sort of black sphere and the splashes of paint. There's a chaos to it, but there's also this future-oriented, strange, feminine, erotic, sensual, sexual nature to it too, which I think really does talk about the Pluto process. And we'll look at a graph and a slide a little later about Pluto. But this is kind of the tone for, I think, 2023. So we'll just jump in and start looking at the chart here. And we'll start today. It's December 29th as I'm recording this video, about 11 o'clock here on the East Coast. And I wanted to start here because we're starting the year of 2023 under the auspices of a Mercury retrograde. So we can see, and in fact, just hours ago, Mercury stationed retrograde here at 24 degrees of Capricorn. And so it's very interesting. One of the facts is that as it stationed, it was exactly conjunct with Venus. And so as I look at this, it's like, this is kind of a nice, sort of gentle, kinder, compassionate start to what could be a challenging retrograde. We got, Mercury retrograde in Capricorn. And I think it's an apt start for that we're starting 2023 in a Mercury retrograde in Capricorn. Because one of the themes that's going to emerge over the course of 2023 is this idea of unfinished business. And our unfinished business is unfinished Capricorn business. And this is going to relate to the fact that Pluto itself is going to change signs here during the course of 2023 and move into Aquarius for a bit. And then it's going to retrograde and go back into Capricorn for the rest of 2023. So that's the unfinished Capricorn business. It's going to move back into Aquarius in 2024. It's going to move back into Capricorn. It won't be until, I think it's November 2024, until the Pluto in Aquarius chapter begins in earnest. And that will be it's a 19-year cycle. So we'll be setting ourselves up for the next 2 decades of a real shift in, Pluto tends to be the collective energy in a lot of ways. It operates at a collective level. It's so big, it's so powerful. Of course, it does affect us all individually, but it really tends to show up in the collective, which is why I think it's a fascinating cycle to observe. And anytime it shifts signs, as it's about to do, there's usually some major transitions in the world events, in society that we can see. It can be often crises and dramatic or traumatic events. So that's something we'll be looking at, in the course of 2023. And I think about the last time Pluto changed signs was moving from Sagittarius to Capricorn, which it did in 2007, 2008. It did this similar thing. Went in, went back, goes in, goes back. And of course, that was the end of the Sag period, which was really globalism. Sagittarius is this worldly, Pluto and Sag was the beginning and the foundation of what we know as the global economy. The internet just exploded during this period, where we are truly a global village after having that period. But as it was coming to an end, we had a global financial crisis. And that really symbolized moving from Sag into Capricorn, like the whole global banking system, which is symbolized by Capricorn, was threatened collapse. So it was a traumatic event that signaled that change. So we may anticipate a similar type of challenge as we move between signs in this year to come. So that's kind of, again, having the hindsight, right? What astrology gives us, this bigger picture, like we're looking at very large cycles of time unfolding, does help us to have foresight about what we can anticipate going forward. So, as we look at the beginning of 2023, we're going to have Mercury retrograde in Capricorn. And so it's a good and I think appropriate start to the year, where we want to enter this year with some caution, with hindsight, with just really reflecting on the year that was, taking a more grounded, sober, practical approach to the year. Because that's what the Capricorn archetype is really calling us to at its highest. So when we're working in this frame, in this time frame, we're in Capricorn season, and we'll be, as we always start every new year with Capricorn, right? So it's like just sort of taking stock. And we're, certainly this past year, really, you might even bring your frame of reference to the past 3 years. Like, where have we come since that massive conjunction in Capricorn in 2020, when you had Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, like kind of a configuration of a lifetime, a generational signature. And it really was the beginning of this decade. The 2020s are really, I think we're going to bracket this decade as saying, wow, that was a major transition point. And here we are living through it. So hopefully this is helping us to navigate these waters in a way that we're more conscious, we're more aware. There's less uncertainty. Of course, we can't know everything, but just having a lay of the land, right? Having a good map can help us on our journey rather than just flying blind. So that's one thing that's interesting as we begin 2023. All right, so so Mercury retrograde. Ironically, Mercury will be retrograde in Earth signs for all of its retrogrades during 2023. Another thing that's going to be interesting about the year to come. So this is the first of several. The other thing that is interesting about the beginning of this year is we see that Jupiter here, 0 degrees Aries, has returned to Aries. It came into Aries earlier in 2022, retrograded back into Pisces. Kind of a move that I was referring to as like a recalibration of the soul, our soul purpose. And now that it's moving back into Aries again, it feels like it's an alignment between soul purpose and life purpose. We're going to start to get this. This is a very powerful, energetic transit as Jupiter is moving. It's starting to pick up speed and starting to move really in the fastest phase of its orbit over the next 3 or 4 months. It will move all the way through the sign of Aries in the first 6 months of the year. So, and we can look at what that signifies in terms of Jupiter and Aries, right? If you think about Jupiter as a planet that tends to expand everything it touches, right? It's expansive. It's growth oriented. It wants to broaden our horizons. It's the great benefic. It really brings this generosity. There's a spirituality to it. It's philosophical. It seeks truth. It's future oriented, right? There's something very inspired about Jupiter. And so as it moves through Aries, it's a new, and this is something interesting in terms of the Jupiter cycle, right? It's a 12-year cycle where it goes through all 12 signs, about an average of a sign per year. So anytime Jupiter moves from Pisces into Aries, it's beginning a new cycle. And so that's why Aries always has this initiatory quality to it. So Jupiter moving through the sign of the Ram, right? There's just this pioneering, courageous, bold initiation wanting to take place. So we may find ourselves, really inspired to start something new, something big, something bold, something ambitious, right? And it is this feeling of we've been under a lot of restriction, a lot of Saturn energy, the Saturn-Uranus square we've been in. It feels like as we start 2023, we're going to be like, all right, we're invigorated. There's something new, and this is it's a really nice transit that we can align with here. So we got that going for us, which is, I think we're ripe for some new energy to come in, and this certainly is giving us that. Now, I think the first couple months is going to be, some movement. Like I say, it's going to be uneventful. There are always things, but as I'm looking at sort of the bigger picture stuff, let me just pull up my notes here. I want to move into, it feels like March is setting up as probably the most impactful month of the year. And so let's just sort of scoot forward here in the chart. I'm going to go to March 7th is the first day I want to look at. Reason being is on March 7th, we have the sign of Pisces here, and we have Saturn moving into Pisces. And this is a big deal. This is going to be a big shift. For the last 5 years since Saturn went through the sign of Capricorn, the sign it rules, and then went through the sign of Aquarius, the sign it rules, right? We've been under a very powerful Saturn energy. And I think it has helped, among many other things, right? It conjuncted Pluto during this period. It conjuncted Jupiter during this period, that great conjunction in 2020. It squared Uranus during this period. It's been a lot of Saturn energy. And it's created a heaviness, a challenge, a difficulty, loss, suffering, right? Like the entire coronavirus and pandemic period, the challenges we've had, the war, all of these things have been Saturnian. And so now, as Saturn leaves its sort of domicile, right? It's been very comfortable and very operative in its own signs. As it dips now here into Pisces, this will be a pretty palpable shift. And, a metaphor is just like, Saturn likes to be at the reins, controlling, very controlling, right? And we've had these reins feeling like they're drawn pretty tight, right? And here, as it moves into Pisces, it's almost like Saturn has to kind of let go of the reins a little bit. It's like losing its authority. It has to submit to Pisces, which is that sort of mutable water sign. So it's challenging for Saturn. And so it's going to probably signal this loosening, this shaking off the chains, if you will. Now, I say this happens, for good or for ill, because while living under very harsh conditions and restrictions on our movement and having to get vaccinated and travel being difficult and lockdowns, right? As difficult as that's been, sometimes rules, regulations, structure are pretty helpful for navigating difficult times. So now as Saturn moves into Pisces, there's going to be this period, I think, of it could be confusing. It could be disorienting. There could be a lot more uncertainty, right? We're coming out of a period that has been hyper-rational, right? That was very typical as we looked at of the Saturn-Uranus square. That's hyper-rationality, hyper-vigilant, right? There's just a fear and a caution and the sense of danger. Now with Saturn in Pisces, we're getting a different quality. We're coming into something that's much more ambiguous, much less defined, some uncertainty. There could be some confusion with this transit as we move into. We leave the certainty of the past and we're ready to be done with it, but the uncertainty of the future could be a little disorienting. Now, Saturn moving through Pisces brings a sense of focus and practicality into the arena of the creative, the imaginative, the transcendent, the transcendental, the spiritual, the cosmic, right? All of these things that we associate with Pisces, who's ruled by Neptune, right, is much more nebulous and expanded and ephemeral, right? It's hard to pin down, which for Saturn, that's very challenging terrain to navigate. So I think there will be some the sense of confusion I get from this signature. But the other thing is that once Saturn sort of sets its focus and sort of settles into Pisces, it's really going to start to turn its focus, its attention, its discipline, its critical lens on the areas of our lives and our culture that contain spirituality, creativity, the imagination, fantasy, the virtual reality. So I'm predicting here that this will be a period in which, we've been under almost a spell, because we've also had, because Neptune has been in Pisces since 2012, it's kind of cast this magical spell on our imagination, on our creativity, on our spirituality. And I think this period has been, for good or for ill, right? The positive side has been a re-emergence into the spiritual dimension. I think we've We've revived a lot of ancient practices, and reclaimed some older ways of being in the world. Some older spiritual traditions have come back into the fold. Some very new ideas and techniques have become much more popular and accessible. This whole, what we would call the New Age, a bit of a loaded term, but it really does encompass something new, a new spirituality, right? And so Neptune in Pisces has supported that. And I think for a lot of us, being able to go into this sort of sacred, safe bubble of our spiritual domain has been a nice reprieve from the very harsh realities that we've been living through. As well, there's an escape not only into the spiritual, but into the imaginal, into the fantasy world. A lot of us have maybe escaped into the gaming world or the metaverse or things like this. But there is a shadow side to that as well. If you just think about what it means, escaping into, escaping from what, and then what are we denying by escaping into fantasy or escaping into the imagination? So one thing that may come from this transit is it feels like it has the quality of a bursting of a bubble of sorts, right? That whole fantastical bubble whatever we've retreated into that really is, it's not just imaginal, but then it's delusional, right? It's deceptive. We've deceived ourselves, or we're being deceived by others. And I think the shadow side of this Neptune in Pisces period has been, it's given us a lot of false prophets. It's given us a lot of fake gurus and some of the influencers in that space. It's bullshit. There's a lot of bullshit going on. And so I think the Saturn and Pisces period there'll be a lot of reckoning for those types of characters that will meet they'll meet their karma, if you will. And this is going to, affect all of us. Like any place that we have been deluding ourselves, the things that we have used to escape for good reason over the past couple years, may be seen in a harsher, colder reality. You're going to see things in a new light. And this could be challenging. It could be difficult. It could be painful. Almost like the peeling off of the Band-Aid, right? And it's that slow peeling rather than just tearing it off, which you might get with Mars moving through here, right? Saturn's going to do it slow and painfully, unfortunately. But I think this is going to be but the benefit is that what can you restructure? If you are willing to look at this area of life, look at your spirituality, look at your creativity too. It's like this could be an incredibly productive period for anyone who works in the arts, for instance. If you're a musician, if you're any kind of creativity, whether it's your profession or just your hobbies or your interests, we all have a creative capacity. And so could be super productive to be more structured in whatever creative endeavors you're involved in. Something else that's interesting about, so the shifting into Pisces is it's going to feel a little more gentle. Also interesting is that as it's moving now into Pisces, it's forming a much more harmonious relationship with the nodes, right? We talked about it all last year, where for most of 2022, as Saturn was in Aquarius, it was squaring the nodes, right? Which was also squaring Uranus. It added to this tension of difficulty. We were really having to work hard about what we talked about, right? Was the compass of Taurus. We were trying to get more embodied in our own self, comfortable in our own bodies. We were trying to heal the past, that Scorpio, the trauma, the emotional baggage and try to clean house, and so move forward. And Saturn was there squaring it, making it really difficult and really forcing us to do some hard work on ourselves. Now that's a little softening. It's like, okay, well, let's, now we can be more productive, but we can do it in a little more gentle way, right? It went from the stern taskmaster to maybe the sort of gentle, kind grandfather or your favorite uncle or something who's just trying to help you along. Saturn is taking on this tone. So that's a nice, again, this shift. So a couple of nice things happening. We got the Aries energy with Jupiter. We've got Saturn shifting signs. Could be uncertain, but there's a release of tension. But as we move into March, this is going to bracket, I think, a pretty impactful month. And so just erase this stuff here, and let's move to, let me check my notes. Another interesting thing, configuration we've got going on is on March 10th, so just a few days after Saturn moves into Pisces, we get a conjunction of Jupiter moving through Aries, conjuncting exactly Chiron, and broadly conjuncting Venus here. And so this is a really interesting transit. And as I said, look, by early March, Jupiter's already halfway through Aries, really moving quickly as it's heading towards the conjunction with the Sun. This is a symbol to me when I see Jupiter and Chiron together. One of the metaphors you could say is big healing, big time healing, opportunity for some big time healing. And the co-presence of Venus here just adds another sort of dimension to the healing nature, to something that is much more, being kind to ourselves, really taking better care of ourselves. And the fact that this is occurring in Aries would indicate new modalities of health and wellness. And so it would be a great time for all of us to really explore some new or pioneering techniques, new to us maybe, or it's also a symbol that seems to me to support, the idea of medical breakthroughs could happen under this configuration. It's quite possible. This symbolism is just bursting with potential for, breakthroughs in health, wellness, how we take care of ourselves. It also, the other thing I think of when I think of Jupiter Chiron is it also is the ultimate symbol of big pharma, right? Big medical, the healthcare industry in general, the insurance industry, the drug business, all of these things. Maybe it's a time to really start a new conversation about healthcare in this country. We, as the wealthiest nation on the planet, we don't have a healthcare system that seems to be on par with our economic status. And so maybe there's a conversation about, real changes in healthcare, universal healthcare, may become in the conversation again. I think a lot of these universal concepts are going to be coming our way, and we'll talk more about that in the year to come. But one other thing I think about when I see this, and as I was writing about this, was I'm wondering if this doesn't bring into the conversation, the new vaccines that we were introduced to during the pandemic, these mRNA vaccines. They were fast-tracked for approval. Normally, the FDA would take probably years to approve those drugs. It happened in a matter of months under the pressure of the pandemic that they really wanted to push these through because it was out of crisis and necessity. And so I don't think as a society we've really gauged the impact that these drugs will have. And we're already seeing that they're going to be applied much more broadly than just treating COVID, for instance. This is a whole new class of drugs that have been on the rise for years that now are just suddenly being thrust on the public. And I think a conversation may arise during this transit about the impact of these drugs, the role of big pharma, this new era that we're moving into in terms of healthcare and medicine. There's a lot of money at stake, Jupiter. So it'll be interesting. I'm keeping my eyes peeled for this period to see what shakes up in all of those areas. I think, though, there's something of, Chiron is the natural healer, right? There's a shamanic wisdom to this symbol. So I think another big boost to natural modes of healing, more holistic, homeopathic health, I think gets a boost from this. So I think a lot of people will start looking to alternative forms of medicine as we move into this period. There's a new frontier here of new wellness. I think a lot of the psychedelic assisted healthcare or mental health care practices are starting to become much more legitimate. I think you're going to see a big push in that. Plant-based healing and medicine. So it's one to watch out for. I'm very curious about what this transit will actually present us with. But this is what we do, right? We look at what are the metaphors? What are the symbols that are ripe for being expressed? And we can't, as I said, concretely predict it, but we can archetypally predict these kinds of things happening. So that's getting into mid-March, and then not long after that, just check my notes. Yeah, if we go, we're going to come into the spring equinox on the 21st. Really powerful equinox. I think this will be a very initiatory, bold new. It's a new moon taking place at 0 degrees sun. So it's like there's something very initiatory about a new phase. Jupiter moving through the sign. Mercury's there. It's like you can just see it, right? You can just see this stellium taking place in Aries. Very bold. And then just, a day or two later, we're going to get, if we pay attention here to Pluto, on the 23rd now, we get Pluto's initial ingress into Aquarius. Big deal. It doesn't mean that, on March 23rd, suddenly the world is going to change, but this is I'm calling this, as I call it, the glimpse of the global gear shift, right? It's the beginning of a very long cycle, but it's only a glimpse. We're going to dip our toe in here into Aquarius. We're going to stay at the 0 degree point. But it's significant because this is the exact place where we did have that great conjunction, the great mutation of Saturn and Jupiter back in 2020 that initiated a 200-year cycle. Really, I think, was the official ignition of Aquarius as an era. I don't know if it's the age of Aquarius, but we are definitely in an Aquarian era. We are moving into it. And this, that was initiated, right, with the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. Pluto coming in now is really going to initiate this era proper, for good or for ill. Whenever we're dealing with Pluto, it much like Mars, right? Mars is a difficult energy. It's energy. It is our vitality, but it is challenging. It is the warrior energy, which, when well contained, is really productive and useful and necessary. But boy, it can get off the rails quickly. You can get violence. You can get, rupture, disruption, conflict. And when we're dealing with Mars, the good thing is at least you can see it. Mars, that energy, it may be difficult, but it's conscious. Pluto is the unconscious of Mars, right? It's the higher octave. It takes place on a much more collective energy, but it's harder to pin down, and it kind of can come out of nowhere. It's very eruptive. It's underground. It's subterranean, right? It's literally unconscious. So as Pluto moves into Aquarius, it's going to be a bumpy ride, and I would expect that we're going to get some challenges to Aquarian things. And let me just pull up. I think I have a. Yeah, so we're leaving. Pluto's leaving Capricorn. Let me pull that up, and moving towards Aquarius. So what are we getting a glimpse of here as Pluto moves in? Well, the transformational energy that is Pluto is going to start transforming Aquarian themes. The big thing I think here, when I think of Aquarius and what we're dealing with now, is the technological and the scientific, this sort of future-oriented nature of Uranus. And I think we're dealing with issues of artificial intelligence, cybernetics, right? The cyborg, the technology, which has gone from on our desktops to in our palm of our hands, is now going to start being implanted into our bodies, right? And it's an interesting thing, as I was looking at, Pluto has the sense of the biological struggle, and it's very involved with evolution. And it feels like there's something about this era we're going into where we are evolving into a sort of cybernetic future, right? Where the human body is starting to be merged with our technology in ways that are unprecedented and which may have unexpected consequences. I don't know that it's avoidable. I have my concerns over technology. There's sort of this hope and optimism that that technology is going to solve all of our problems. We've always solved our way forward in many ways. It creates unintended consequences. There's always externalities of these technologies that we're constantly chasing in this evolutionary progress. My guess is that though we're going to have some sort of scary encounter with this human tech interface, right? And this is typical as Pluto changes signs. It's like, whoa, something unexpected, some sort of deeper revelation about the dark side of technology, the dark side of the scientific progress and our kind of faith and trust that we place in science. Science has become the religion of Western society in many ways. I think that's a true statement. And we may have some break in our faith and trust in science to solve our problems, and some negative externality or something that has been underground, not so apparent. This Pluto transit may bring it to the surface in a destructive, eruptive way. I think the other thing, this is symbolic of a greater shift. So, of course, we're going to come into Aquarius here in March, and then by May, June, it's going to retrograde. It's only going to get right to the beginning, and then we're back to Capricorn for the rest of 2023. So here we're talking about unfinished business. And as we talked about before, this Pluto Capricorn entire 14-year period has putting its Pluto's evolutionary pressure to evolve the very structure of society. And I've mentioned this in previous videos, but if you look at like every system that is hierarchical, structured, Capricorn has come under intense pressure from Pluto in this period, right? So we look at our our political system, our economic system, the banking and financial system, the education system, the communications technology systems, the energy systems, the transportation systems, the logistics. What hasn't come under, and then in the last 2 years, it's really, we're seeing the incredible fragility of these systems. And they are not built for the 21st century. We are in this transition. This 2020s is really the beginning of the 21st century, I think, in a lot of ways. The rubber has met the road. The past has to be left in the past. We have to move forward. And that is not easy. That is very, very difficult to do at scale, globally. It's not just I have to change, or we have to change our town, or the whole planet is going through this, right, collective rebirthing process. And so that's where we're at. And so this is going to require an incredible amount of patience and willpower and strength and commitment. And there will be difficulty. There will be setbacks. There will be some suffering. It requires this sort of gravitas. And, Pluto transits, if you've had a transit to Pluto transit to your personal places, these are just tough, difficult periods that, while we're in them, can seem overwhelming. It's only after they pass and we've been changed by the experience that we go, oh, that was actually all probably for the best, although I wouldn't want to go through it again. But go through it we must, right? So, Pluto into Aquarius, it's going to be an interesting preview as we make this ingress. Now, bring your attention back to the chart here. So here, Pluto moving in. Now, we just talked about how it was nice that Saturn has moved into this more harmonious relationship with the nodal axis. But right on its heels, now Pluto is taking up this square to the nodes, right? So the pressure is back on. It's like we got this reprieve for a few months, the first quarter of 2023. Now, as we get into March, it's going to feel like the pressure is going to be back on. And something, I would predict this will be a very eventful month. Something major and unexpected, and a big shift is going to probably manifest during this time. One of the things I'm watching very closely, and I think I've been talking about it for a while with the whole Uranus and Taurus revolution and what we value, monetary policy, money systems. We saw this play out with its square with Saturn. I think the great crypto bubble burst with FTX last month. Continued pressure, though. I think one of the things that's likely, in order to go forward, in order to the unfinished business of Capricorn, is a total overhaul of the money system. And this is something that we should have probably started looking at in 2008 with the financial crisis, but we didn't. We kept sort of doubling down. We had banks that were too big to fail. They are bigger now than ever. So the leverage is much, much longer than it even was in 2008, if we can believe that. Now we're dealing with inflation and supply chain. We're probably going to get a currency reset in the terms of the next 2 years. This shift, by the time Pluto officially moves into Aquarius in November 2024, the US dollar as we know it will no longer be the official currency. We will have moved to most likely a digital currency, Aquarius, and this currency battle will be one of the defining features of this period we're moving into. It seems very likely, and the metaphors of all of this seem to support that. So that's the beginning of what becomes a very impactful month. I want to look then at Yeah, as we move, and then, just a couple days later, we started this year with this, we've been in this Mars retrograde in Gemini. It's all said and done, it'll be 9 months that Mars will have been in Gemini. Normally goes through a sign in 2 months, so it's a major deal when it stops down in a sign. But here, as we get into March, by March 25th, Mars has moved out of Gemini into Cancer, where it's going to spend about 2 months. And, this will be another, I think, slightly challenging time, although you see it's making this, we get this big water trine. It's trining that Saturn and Neptune as it comes in. You see the between the trining with the South Node, Mars moving in. It's pretty nice energy here. But in general, Mars is not super in love with its time spent in Cancer. It's considered to be in its fall, sort of like, I would say that Mars gets depressed when it's in Cancer because it can't really be Mars. It's in the water sign, and it's held back. It just doesn't feel comfortable. So this is going to be a difficult, that energy of Jupiter, Aries. Then when it moves direct in Gemini and retraces its steps, it's just as it gets going, it's going to hit this wall of water in a way. So just be ready for that. Some frustration, emotional frustration could be manifest by this. But I want to look forward to, what I'm looking at with Mars here, though, is that when is it going to make its opposition with Pluto? Because one of the things that was interesting in 2022 was the fact that the war in the Ukraine broke out as Mars was coming into its conjunction with Pluto up here in Capricorn in February. And so as I watched that, I was like, okay, well, here is, if we want to look at this conflict as it unfolds, it seems like this Pluto-Mars cycle will be key. That will probably mark some of the major milestones in this conflict as it evolves. So if we look forward to that point where here we are on May 20th, right? Here we can see this opposition now. Pluto's still in Aquarius at 0 degrees, but it's stopped and started its retrograde motion. And here we see it in exact opposition with Mars in Leo. So it's going to be pretty tense. My guess is that there will be some probably major turning point escalation in that Ukraine-Russia war. I think it's interesting that during this month of May into June, as Mars moves forward, at some point at around 11 degrees, I think, Mars is going to conjunct Putin's midheaven and his natal Pluto, which I think is a key point for him. The pressure of this conflict, this oppositional energy, Pluto-Mars, if there's going to be an eruption of something major and violent, this is a day that I'm looking at with some caution and some trepidation, because it carries that signature of explosiveness. And because, it started with that Mars-Pluto conjunction, it seems like it's kind of, it's impactful. We're seeing it's got this massive, there's a fixed grand cross going on. It's squaring the nodes. Jupiter's over here, conjunct the North Node in Taurus. This is, fixed. Like, this is where it just kind of, things come to logger jams, and everyone's sort of, hunkered down in their position. There's a lot of tension here that could be a reason that I'm looking at May as being potentially a volatile time. But then, by June, Pluto is going to be back into Capricorn, and so then we're going to be dealing with our unfinished business, and it'll be another kind of tone shift, right? So, trying to see exactly, here we are, June 24th. We've got Pluto back into Capricorn. Squaring the nodes, squaring Jupiter. So a lot to contemplate just in the first half of 2023, and those were the kind of the big picture transits I wanted to bring to your attention. Obviously, we're going to have, we'll have eclipse seasons starting to shift too. We're going to be moving from, we'll have a couple more in that Taurus-Scorpio axis, and then the next set of eclipses, I believe, will take place in the Aries-Libra axis, so we'll have a major shift there. We'll talk about that a lot as the year progresses, but sort of just in general, a move into more independence within relationships, right? This tension of how do I maintain my own independence, Aries, and how do I maintain my relationships, Libra. Challenges of relationship will be the major theme for the next 18 months once we get into mid-2023 all the way into the end of 2024. So, of course, that will play out on the world stage as well. Negotiations, alliances. I think you're going to see a lot of shifting geopolitically with alliances and strategies in order to move into this future that we're building, this Pluto in Aquarius era. Remember, 19 years, the next 2 decades being set. So I'm looking at that. I've been looking at, 2024 through 25 is impactful. I'm looking at some things in 2028, which are going to be critical. So we're really in it, guys. Like, I think the first act of the 2020s is sort of closing. This is the beginning of Act 2. And so it's exciting. Like, of course, there's massive changes. We're living in very turbulent times, very disrupted times, very exciting times. And so all these things are happening to us together. As I said, it's a collective rebirthing. So we're going all through it together. And we all are having our own individual experience of it. We're all at different places in our lives, different stations in our lives. We've got, it's interesting, we have a whole generation who are retiring, the baby boomers, right? They're all Pluto and Leo people. My parents are baby boomers. They were born with Pluto and Leo. Witnessing Pluto now in Aquarius, in the opposite sign, there's this generational culmination moment. And it's interesting, too, because it's rare that a generation lives long enough to see their Pluto oppositions, right? Anyone born with, what was it, 1939? So, we're talking about people in their 90s, but some people who have lived that long are going to see their Pluto opposition in their charts. That's pretty fascinating. But, we've got 5 generations living right now and moving through this with different orientations, and then each of us as individuals. This is all hitting us in different ways, and this is why I always encourage people to learn to read your own chart, right? I talk about this a lot in the Blueprint of the Soul series, right? It's like, if you can read the blueprint, you become the architect of your own destiny. And a good step to learning that is get a reading with a competent astrologer. I love doing readings. If you want to sign up and do a reading with me, I'd be happy to do it. But if there's someone you know and trust and resonate with, make sure that you're getting good advice and getting facility to understand how this is all playing out in your chart. Because I think of these things, it's like, okay, Saturn's coming into Pisces. What does that mean for you? Like, I know for me, that means Saturn's going to be going through my 4th house for the next 2.5 years, right? My home, my security, my establishment, my sense of self, how am I grounded? How am I rooted? I'm going to be challenged, most likely, in those areas, in Pisces ways. Like, the dream of having the perfect home is going to be challenged. As Jupiter went through there last year, and I changed houses. And so I use these things in my life. And I don't know how I would, I guess I would live without them, but I don't think I would live as well without this perspective. helping to orient, to know where to be focused. So hopefully you have enough facility to see where this is lining up for you. I encourage you to think about those things. Yeah, and so we'll talk about this a lot more. I mean, there's, we'll be back again, and we'll be talking about Aquarius season in the next couple weeks, but hopefully this is enough to sort of get you oriented and start thinking about the new year again, starting with this retrograde, Mercury retrograde in Capricorn, right? Let's just get really clear and approach the new year with a sense of humility, of patience, of somewhat of a sober approach, because we really want to be very aware as these things start to come at us pretty quickly in the new year. So anyway, hope that's been helpful for you. I hope you got some insight, some good takeaways there. As always, if you like the content here, I would invite you to sign up, to subscribe, and become a fan and a follower of the channel. Hope to do a lot more stuff in the coming year. I always have intentions of expanding this. These things are time consuming, but I do love doing it, and I love growing the channel and getting to get the word out on this amazing art and science that is astrology. So, all right, that's it for this video. We'll catch you next time. Have a happy, healthy, and safe new year, everyone. All right, Sat Nam.